Lesson 19, International Organizations. There are two types of international organizations: non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. These are outside of governments, like the Red Cross, which goes around and helps people in disasters and injured people and so on in military theaters. And then there are another type of international organizations, intergovernmental organizations, or IGOs. Membership of these is made up of national governments. Usually the states that are members of these are made members through treaties, and the members will set limits on what the intergovernmental organizations can do. A great example of an intergovernmental organization is the United Nations. The United Nations was established in 1945 as a forum for nations to solve disputes. It was established to basically replace the failed League of Nations that didn't stop World War II from happening, and the United Nations was a response to World War II. And there are 192 members currently, according to what I've come across. There were only 191 according to the text, but since then I think it's Montenegro has been added. There are three main goals of the United Nations. One is to promote world peace. Two is to have nations treat each other fairly and work with each other truthfully, fair diplomacy essentially. And three, foster cooperation among nations to solve economic and social problems that the world faces. Okay, so the Organization of the United Nations. The main headquarters is in New York City. A lot of the dollars that support the United Nations comes from the United States. There are two assemblies within the United Nations that are key to understanding it: the General Assembly, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and the Security Council. The judicial body, the main judicial body of the United Nations, is the International Court of Justice, and it is administered by the Secretariat and the Economic and Social Council. So these are parts of the administration, the bureaucracy of the UN. So the General Assembly. Every member nation has a delegation. Every member nation is represented at the General Assembly. They discuss, debate, and recommend solutions to international problems, and the General Assembly controls the UN budget. The Security Council, it's sort of an executive board for the General Assembly. It has authority to make peacekeeping decisions. It can break off relations with a nation. It can end trade with a nation. It can even use military force, although it's unable to act if one member vetoes. And the Security Council has permanent members like the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, and China, I believe, are the permanent members. And then there are rotating members on the UN Security Council. International Court of Justice, also known as the World Court. It meets at The Hague. You see the picture there. And member nations can submit disputes to this court for settlement. And the World Court also deals with certain types of human rights abuses. The picture there of Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, holding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a little more comprehensive than the Bill of Rights is. Covers more stuff. Covers stuff concerning equality issues in a different kind of way of thinking than our system, and more guarantees than our system has. The Secretariat handles day-to-day business. The Secretary General runs the Secretariat. He's appointed by the General Assembly, or she is appointed, and carries out the instructions of the Security Council. The Economic and Social Council, also known as ECOSOC, it promotes social and economic progress. It deals with issues such as education, health, and human rights. Other UN organizations that your text mentions, the World Health Organization, or WHO, tries to monitor things like, Asian flu, or this flu, that flu. The United Nations Children's Fund, also known as UNICEF, which tries to help children out and deals with educational issues and things like that. The picture shows one of UNICEF's School in a Box, these kind of portable kits to help teach kids about the world, and they take these fairly inexpensive schools in a box and supply them to teachers around the world to help teach kids who otherwise wouldn't have much of a chance of an education. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, they help struggling, emerging states, emerging democracies in other states to try to improve their economies and loan money, for example, to them. However, there's a lot of criticism of the World Bank and the IMF. I'm not sure it's completely fair. They're trying to tackle a very difficult issue with limited resources, but it might be helpful for you to know there is a bit of controversy about their role in the world. Peacekeeping. There have been 56 UN military operations since 1948. The majority of them have happened after the Cold War ended in 1990. The reason it's like that is because before the Cold War ended, military operations would oftentimes be proxy wars, substitute wars, if you will, between the Soviet Union and the U.S. supporting different factions in a country. Now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, there's no Cold War, and the UN is no longer divided between two powerhouses. It can act a little more with clear-cut goals and less opportunity for conflict with a superpower. So the UN uses international forces to block combatants. In other words, they literally will move UN troops into a position where they're just in the way for the two sides in a country, say like in Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina in the Balkans or in the Sudan. They just get in the way so that they try to get these opposing forces to calm down, lower the tensions. They try to monitor conflict and eventually, hopefully, create some sort of peace. They can also oversee elections and provide humanitarian aid. Many times what goes on around the world is basically in dictatorships they have sham elections where they rig the results. So sometimes there are calls for UN oversight of the elections. So peacekeeping operations. In 1990, the Persian Gulf War was a UN operation. George H.W. Bush set up this peacekeeping operation through the UN to give it more credibility around the world. It worked pretty well. Economic sanctions against Iraq to compel the destruction of weapons of mass destruction, also known as WMDs, was also a UN action. In 2011, there were 8 missions in Africa, 2 missions in Europe, 3 missions in the Middle East, 3 missions in Asia and the Pacific, and 1 mission in Haiti. And here we can see a map of where a lot of these actions took place. So the European Union, this intergovernmental organization, which is moving toward a supranational government, which is an organization with more authority than its members, which sounds kind of, well, this is kind of a complicated concept because apparently supranational government isn't quite the same thing as a federal government. It seems like it would be moving that direction if you have a supranational government that has more authority than its members. That's almost a federal arrangement. So the EU, or European Union, has developed into a quasi-government with the authority to enforce its decisions that apply to its members, and usually about issues relating to economics, travel, transportation, production of foods, that kind of stuff. So the background for the European Union: by around 1957, 1958, 6 Western European countries will form the European Economic Community. This, even before that, it started off as the European Coal and Steel Commission, which was an attempt to establish some sort of economic arrangement that would prevent France and Germany from going to war, and it worked out famously. In 1993, this European Economic Community was renamed the European Union. At the time of the text, there were 19 members. According to my research now, there are 27 members. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you've been watching the map, you'll see it shows the number of members over the years, how it's expanded. And you can see how it's expanded into Eastern Europe as a result of the Cold War ending and the collapse of communism. So in 1993, the EU members signed the Maastricht Treaty, which began to yield some power to the European Union to enforce trade rules, criminal policy, immigration, and citizenship. And for example, you see this passport. They all have basically a standard passport, and then it'll have a symbol of the country that the passport comes from. So the EU has a very complicated government. There's the Council of the European Union, which decides key policy directions. And then there's the European Parliament. It's a legislative branch. It works with the Council to form the budget and supervise smaller institutions. So if you look here, you see a commission that proposes legislation, and then it works through the Council and works through the Parliament, and they apparently have to agree. The EU has the European Court of Justice, a judicial branch with one judge from each state. They use treaties signed between the countries and through the EU as precedent that can override the laws of member nations. And then you have the European Commission, that handles the daily work of the EU. The president of the European Commission is chosen by the Council and directs bureaucracy and oversees the budget. So critics of the European Union, they argue that the European Union bureaucracy, or what they call the Eurocracy, has grown too large, that there are too many members in the European Union, and because of the size of the European Union today, and because of the size of its bureaucracy, it is not responsive anymore to the public. So these various European Union countries have actual representatives in the European Union as well in their own country. And when you get too big, basically it gets harder and harder for the little guy to get kind of his say and be heard.